All right, welcome to our second installment of our webinar. We started with a webinar last week as schools are closing due to the coronavirus, and so this week we thought we'd go into a bit more detail with some of the tools for running a remote mathematics classroom. And so our three top tools are Mathspace, Slack, and Zoom. So Gillian and Daniel, if you were at last week's webinar, they'll be joining me to discuss these three top tools, and we're going to go into a bit more detail with those tools. Okay, but before we start, some just an overview, some housekeeping. The session will last approximately 60 minutes. We will be using Zoom to deliver it, as you know. It's going to be one of the tools that we talk about. We'll be using some of the tools inside Zoom, so feel free to jump in the chat. I see a lot of people already jumping in, which is great. And also there's a Q&A feature, so if you have any questions, our team will be monitoring that Q&A throughout, so feel free to jump on and ask any questions. We will try and answer as many questions as we can, but any questions that are not answered immediately, we have a Mathspace teacher support group on Slack. We'll be sending a link at the end of this session, and the three of us are actually going to stick around for an hour after the session to answer any questions you might have inside Slack. And we really want to leverage the collective community for answering those questions. So you might have really specific questions about whether you're teaching a particular classroom of students with special needs or things like that. Among the Slack community, I'm sure that we'll have teachers who are in a similar position, and we can really share some of the techniques that everybody's using. So really encourage everybody to join that Slack community, and any questions we don't get to, we want this conversation to continue. We'll all be learning off each other. Okay. So who's running this thing? Who am I? I think, so you met Gillian and Daniel last week. A lot of you would have. So Gillian and Daniel both have extensive experience teaching online. They're part of the Mathspace team. They have the curriculum experience of being math teachers, but also in previous lives, they have taught extensively online. And they also are involved in school support as a school liaison, so helping schools with onboarding and giving them just how to kind of get Mathspace into their classrooms and best practices for doing so. Myself, I'm the founder of Mathspace, founded Mathspace 10 years ago, and I was actually telling the team, I'm a derivative trader, so I was telling the team yesterday that I'm having a bit of a deja vu moment right now. The reason I actually started Mathspace 10 years ago was because of the global financial crisis. As we're going through another financial and health crisis at the moment, it's kind of reminded me of the days of why Mathspace began to start with. For me personally, it was all about being a derivative trader in a global financial crisis. It's actually a great time to be a trader. The volatility in the markets is a derivative trader's dream. So, but what I felt was, as I was kind of personally benefiting from the markets going crazy, everybody else around me was miserable. And so this deja vu moment, as it kind of happens again, as the markets go crazy and maybe derivative traders are kind of benefiting. But hopefully for us, this is a chance to kind of add value and not be a kind of the better player in a zero-sum game, but really add value. And really for us at this time when schools are closing, that's what we're really trying to do at Mathspace. So hopefully you'll find these webinars are part of that value that we can add as you are transitioning. We want to really share the expertise of Gillian and Daniel in particular as you are transitioning to a digital learning environment. Okay, so I'll pass on to Gillian to just set the context of what's going on out there.
Yeah, so I think even since our last webinar last Thursday, I believe a lot has changed, I think, in how teachers are feeling about working with students online. A lot of people have already jumped into working with students online. And I really loved, I checked Twitter yesterday, and I really loved this conversation between teachers about, like, just being exhausted, even though we're not maybe physically moving as much. There's a lot of planning that has come up. It's almost like the first week of school all over again. And so just giving ourselves permission to do less if we need to, and really focus on the well-being of students. And then I like the response from Kelly here, because it's really reminding us, like, planning for online teaching is very different than planning for the classroom. Because as soon as we're live with students, we can't make those modifications on the fly. But then the final response is what I love, is that, we can make it work. Students can get a lot of feedback, and we can create this cycle of having students do investigations, coming back to us with their questions. We're supporting them, giving them more feedback, more revisions happening. And that cycle of learning really can continue.
Okay, so some general assumptions that we're making for the people attending the webinar today, that we've all been thrown into distance learning with not much notice, not many resources, and then things have even changed. They're changing very rapidly. But even in the last 5 days, we've had more schools close. We've had some schools deciding to remain open, but then many parents are still, for the safety of their children, keeping their children home. So honoring that decision, schools, even though they're open, still need to be teaching online as well as to their students face-to-face. Some of us don't have much experience with online teaching. So in last week's webinar, we really talked about just some of the general tools. We want to go into these tools a bit deeper today and help everyone out, especially with people who don't have much experience using technology in their classrooms. We've all got very good intentions, and so we're all here to learn, and we want to put our students first. And so, Gillian's going to talk more later today about, how we can look after our students' well-being as well as their education. And we don't know how long this is going to last. Prime Minister of Australia the other day said that, we should expect this even to last for the next 6 months. So please, stop going to the beach and hoarding toilet paper. So yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, so today we're going to be doing that deeper dive into our out-through top tools. We think that these are the best-in-class digital tools for running a remote classroom. There's obviously other tools out there as well, and what we haven't really covered as well in here is any kind of LMS, such as Google Classroom or Canvas or something like that you might be using. So we want to really focus on the actual classroom experience side of things. And the 3 tools that we think are best in class and must-haves for a digital classroom is a video conferencing tool, and Zoom is our pick for that. I'll mention that all these tools are currently free while schools are closed. So, and we'll be talking about that a bit more, of how to access those free tools. Then for a messaging tool, so for building that community and staying connected with students and families, we think Slack is the best tool for doing that. We've used a bunch of messaging tools just internally at Mathspace, and Slack really has some great features for building that connection. Nothing has really built that connection in a remote team at Mathspace as much as Slack. And then finally for digital curriculum, so Mathspace is a real premium digital curriculum, but we've made that available for free to for schools that are affected by closures due to coronavirus. And it really has everything that you'd expect. It covers the entire curriculum, but we'll be focusing on really how to teach, assign, monitor progress, and encourage independent student work, which is going to be particularly important when you can't be in the classroom with students. So we'll focus on that particular aspect of Mathspace in today's webinar. Okay. So I'll pass on to Gillian, who will be talking about Zoom next.
So if you're already meeting with students, you may be laughing, because this is what you're going to see when you have a group of 20 or 30 students all getting online at the same time. Something that still takes me some time every time I'm in Zoom is there's so many things moving, especially when cameras are on. So it's great to see faces. It's super important to hear our students' voices, but just know that, like, there's a lot of moving parts and maybe distractions that you might have. And that's something to think about as we figure out how to make lessons work online. So another thing you might see if you've taught a lesson is your computer screen has a lot of different parts. And you may see this right now in the live webinar, depending on whether or not you have the chat open, depending on whether or not you have the list of participants open. Maybe you have a whiteboard screen, you have the annotation tools. So there's a lot of different pieces you can move around. And so Zoom, as you're using it with students, it's going to look really different depending on the features that you're using it for. So we're going to jump into some of those features and how we can translate those into live classes. So why Zoom? When it comes down to it, the best way we can replicate the classroom experience is with live sessions. It's so important still to hear students' voices, to see them, to talk to them in real time. And this is the closest we have to the classroom setting. We can use video, we can use audio, we can use the chat, many different types of communication. And there's also different features of Zoom that we can take and translate into teaching strategies that we were used to doing in the classroom. The good news is right now is that Zoom is currently waiving the time limit for free accounts. So if you do sign up for Zoom for free and you sign up through the school link, you can have sessions as long as you'd like. The only restriction you'll find is that you cannot invite more than 100 students at a time, which you may not want to do anyway. So what we did as we were planning was we tried to think of what are some common elements of a lesson that might take place in the classroom, and how can we replicate those elements in the Zoom classroom? So if we're meeting with students live, how can we take those things we were just doing with them a few weeks ago and fit them into the tools that we have available? So go ahead and just take a moment to glance over this chart. A lot of us might start with an opener or a warm-up at the beginning of a lesson, maybe some direct instruction. We want to make sure we're engaging students so they're not just listening to our voices. Even if we are talking, they have a way to participate. We want to hold them accountable because, you know, even as adults, we know there's a lot of distractions working from home. And so, of course, our students are tempted by those same things. And we also want to make sure there's opportunities for students to collaborate and for us to collect data and really gather information to see, are they learning what we wanted them to learn? What do students need from me today, tomorrow, the next day, moving forward? And then the last thing is, a lot of us are planning asynchronously right now for many reasons. So how can we leverage Zoom to create recordings that are personalized for our students? So we'll start with a little warm up. I would like everyone to participate. So this is a sample slide I might give to students just to get them starting to interact, familiarizing my own students with the tools in Zoom if they're not familiar. So we're going to open up a poll in just a moment. I'd like you to take a look at the picture on the screen and decide which figure doesn't belong. So, you know, A, B, C, or D, which figure doesn't belong? And we're going to open up a poll so that you can choose your answer right now. So when the poll is open, I'd like you to select A, B, C, or D. So take a look at the picture. You want to change your mind? No problem, change your mind. And let's take about another 15 seconds or so. If you go to the toolbar at the bottom, it may hover when you click your mouse on the green rectangle. You should see the poll pop up. Let's say another 10 more seconds to get your answer in. I see 81% of us have chosen our answer. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and close the poll at this point, and you can see everyone's responses. So it looks like we have a lot of different responses going on, and you would expect this with students. And even though the majority chose C, Well, about half chose C. So the rest of us had something else in mind. So what I would like you to do now is in the chat, I would like you to justify your answer. So if you chose A, why did you choose A? Let us know in the chat. If you were one of the 50% of us that chose C, go ahead and give your answer in the chat right now. So I'm seeing a lot of people saying C because of color. Oh, interesting, B because of the way it's oriented. D is a different size. So if you're reading in the chat right now, you can see that answers are coming in very rapidly. So what I like to do with students is called a waterfall. So I personally like to keep the private chat option for students open. And so for a question like this, I will ask them to only send a message to the person below them in the participant list. So each student is sending a justification to one student, and each student is receiving a justification from another student. So that way, when you have all of your students answering at once, you don't either have a student, you know, giving away spoilers before you're ready for it, or you don't have 30 or 40 answers populating in the chat at once. So it's a great tool. If you can train students how to use it appropriately, it's a great opportunity to use private chat and allow for students to really be engaging with each other. If I'm giving direct instruction, there's a few different tools in Zoom that can help you out. The greatest one here is annotation. So I can screen share maybe a PowerPoint slide or a blank whiteboard in Zoom, and I can write on top of the board, and I can direct students to copy down the things that I'm writing. I may have students that I want using a graphic organizer, or maybe I want students to have certain formulas or theorems at their fingertips. I would file share that so I know that as I'm talking, every student has a document they can reference for the things that I don't need them to memorize. I don't need them to go search for on the internet. They just have it right there to pull up during the lesson. And you can always go back and forth with the sharing options between sharing a whiteboard, sharing a PowerPoint. Maybe you want to share an external website that you're having your students work on. So as I'm doing direct instruction, I may already have a slide up on the screen, and then I'm asking students to write what I'm writing, copy down some given information, maybe some definitions. And as I write on the screen, students can write it down on their paper, or maybe they're typing into a Word document, and they can do this as well. So as I'm using the annotation tool, I can pass it to a student. Maybe I want a student to do the next step. Maybe I'll take volunteers at that point. But it is a great tool that you can use as you're having students take notes and gather new information. As I'm talking, I want to make sure that I'm also receiving information from students. So there's some very low stakes ways for students to stay engaged as you're talking and giving direct instruction. Some of those are what Zoom calls the nonverbal feedback. So if you look, there is a hand raise option. So if students need something explained further, they're having issues, they can't hear you, maybe you have a lag, they can raise a hand to let you know there's something that needs to be addressed. You might ask that student for an answer in the chat. You might ask them to send a private message. The other one that I like to use as I'm talking, and I'll just throw it in quite often, is thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up if you have it copied down and you're ready to move on to the next slide. Thumbs up if you feel confident about this new formula. And students can click a button so that as you're talking for, you know, maybe a couple minutes at a time, they still have some information they're giving back to you to let you know how it's going. The attention tracking is great. Again, I mentioned that there can be a lot of distractions at home, and so the attention tracking will let us know if students have windows open on top of the Zoom window. So if a student has been away from the Zoom window for more than 30 seconds, this little clock will show up next to their name in the participant list. And at that point, you might want to send a private message just to make sure that student's okay. So we should probably not assume that they're off playing Minecraft and not listening to your perfect lesson, but you know, there is a chance that there is a reason why they're not in the Zoom session, and we want to just reach out to that student privately, not in front of the whole class, just to figure out what's going on. And maybe they just need a reminder, or maybe they're having to share the computer with someone at the same time, and that's why they had to step away. So it's always great to have students working together. It takes a little bit of the load off of you as the teacher in an online platform. One great tool is the whiteboard. So very simple to open a whiteboard and just divide the board and either take volunteers or assign students to add their work there. So this is a great way to have students presenting or going over answers to an assignment that you gave just by taking a whiteboard and sharing it with the class. So you can also give remote control. So this is a session I had with some students, and Thomas is sharing his screen with the class. So you can see the equation that Thomas was working on, and now we can see it. So students are allowed to request control, and you are allowed to give control to students as well. So they have the option, if they want to share something, they can request it. You can take away that from them at any time that you'd like to move on. The other really great feature we can leverage is breakout rooms. I will advise you, I'll give you guys my personal experience. I didn't use breakout rooms for the entire first semester I started teaching online because it does kind of feel like you're juggling. So I'm going to share it with you because I think it is one of the most interactive and engaging tools that we have available in Zoom, but just be advised, it does take a lot of extra juggling to make this happen in the beginning when you start. So when I'm in a breakout room with students, maybe I would just want students talking to each other and, you know, sharing their answers, explaining verbally. I can have students doing that. I can have students working on a problem set together, and they can be giving each other feedback on the whiteboard screen or in the chat or live onto the actual problem set that they're looking at. So if you're looking to use breakout rooms, I think the easiest way to get started is just to have one task that the whole class is working on, and each student has a group that they're assigned to. So I have group 1 working in breakout room 1, I have group 2 in breakout room 2, and they're all working on the same thing, but they just know that it's their responsibility to check in with maybe only 2 or 3 other students as opposed to sharing out with the whole class. When students are in that breakout room, they can ask you for help. So as the teacher, I'm usually moving myself between breakout rooms every couple of minutes just to remind students I'm here for support. But if a student needs something right away, they can let you know, and maybe you skip the line and you go back to that breakout room because somebody needs something right away. My most favorite way to use breakout rooms is really for the types of things we love to do in the classroom. So something like a stations activity or a student choice option. I would definitely use breakout rooms for that. So here's an option. Students are working on a practice quiz, and each breakout room has a different problem. So I can see who is in each of these breakout rooms and how long they're sticking around in those rooms. Maybe all of my students are getting stuck in practice quiz number 3. That tells me maybe that's the hardest question on the quiz. Maybe students need support on that question. I think student choice is great. A lot of times in Zoom, we're in the whole class together the whole time, and that's not necessarily how a classroom lesson is run. So having those breakout rooms allows students to have options and maybe work in a smaller group and more likely to be reaching out to classmates for support. And then towards the end of the lesson, I want to get some information on whether students are getting it and to make decisions about what I do next in my lesson planning. So this is why I like to use private chat, because I can give an exit ticket very quickly and students are not blurting out the answer in the main chat, but I can see if they understand what it is that we've been learning about. If they need a quick little feedback from me, hey, don't forget to put units on your answer, or maybe there's some indication that I should be supporting that student more. So I can respond with a quick chat if they get it. I can say, great, you're dismissed, have a wonderful day. And if they're not getting the right answer, I can decide if I want to support that on the spot or if I want to follow up with that student later. So you can try now. I think in this session, they're because this is a webinar, I should also point that out. This is a webinar session, which is slightly different than what you'll be doing when you meet with students. That's called a Zoom meeting. So some of the chat features are different. So just be mindful of that. You can try sending me a message to answer this question, but the private chat feature is definitely available in Zoom meetings, which is the option that you'll be using with students. The last thing that I think is really important right now is I know a lot of schools are asking teachers to support asynchronously. So, you know, instead of having a separate application for screen recording, I like to make recordings in Zoom. So how do you make a recording in Zoom? You just schedule a meeting and you're the only person in the meeting. So I join the meeting by myself. Maybe I load in my slides. I use the annotation tool and I talk through a lesson, or I talk through how to navigate to a certain website, and I can retrieve that recording when I'm done. What I like to do with those recordings is take the link, and I have one document or one spreadsheet that I share on my class website, I share on my Slack page, so students know they can always go back to this one centralized location for any recordings of any sessions that have happened during our time working online. So there's a lot of questions, I think, as we're actually using Zoom with young people that we start to have. Some of these questions are really going to depend on the decisions your school administration is making, but I will definitely give you my 2 cents if you do have any flexibility to make your own decisions. I think if you have the option, it's really great to meet with students live once or twice a week for maybe 45 minutes or an hour as a whole class, just to give them that consistency and that feel of your classroom sessions and how they used to be when you were all together at school. And then again, always sharing the recordings of those sessions, because we understand not every student can make it to every online session. When should I teach live versus asynchronously? It's always great to meet with students face-to-face so we can give that real-time feedback and information. You may want to do asynchronous lessons for some sort of review of a topic. Maybe it's just to help students prepare for a particular assignment that you have them working on, and you want to give directions that you can share out with everyone as a recording. Should I teach my classes all at the same time or separately? I had a semester where I think it was over 150 students, and we were on a schedule where I invited all of my students at once. If you have 100 or more students in a session, the chat is like the wild, wild west. Like, things are popping up all the time. And maybe students are sharing answers before a majority of the class is ready for that. So if possible, I think it's better to go, you know, the size of your class section, maybe if that's 15, 30, 40 students, and of course, small group sessions as needed. How should I address attendance and participation? I would be super cautious about using any of this for grading or anything else, just because we can't really assume that every student can log on to live sessions from home. It may be an issue with their bandwidth, that they can't be in an interactive session with everyone at the same time. It may be that they're sharing a device with family members or other kids that have classes to attend. So you can use that information for your own tracking, just to see who might need extra support and who needs a little extra follow-up because they're not there. But we definitely just want to be cautious that there's a lot of reasons why a student may not be able to attend a session live. How many Zoom features should I be using? I would say as many as you're comfortable with. It starts to feel like juggling when you're using a lot of them at once. Start with maybe just using the chat to check in with students, using the annotation, and if you're feeling comfortable, maybe every week or two, just reflect on where you are in your own learning with Zoom and say, hey, maybe I'm going to try breakout rooms today. And I always let students know, hey, you guys, I'm going to try this thing that I've never used before. It could be great, it could not. So I let students know that I'm learning, and usually they're really supportive and patient if the first time you all jump into a tech tool, it doesn't go as planned. Should I be expecting students to use audio and video? Again, with student bandwidth restrictions, they may have a lot of lag on their end if they have video and audio on. So you definitely want to create an environment where students feel comfortable sharing. I always turn my camera on, but we also just want to be mindful they may not be able to do that every single time. Should I use it for direct instruction or student guided activities? I think that the tools that we have to work with in Zoom can help replicate both in the online setting. So I would say stick to, as much as possible, stick to the way you were doing things in the classroom and just find the ways that you can translate that over into Zoom sessions. So where do I get Zoom? There's a special teacher link right now. If you're looking to remove the time limit on Zoom sessions, you can follow the link so they can verify that you're with a school account, and you can hold sessions over 40 minutes long. So you have your meetings with your students live, you have your asynchronous recordings. We still want to check in with students just like we might in the morning before class starts, at lunchtime when we see them, when we see parents coming to pick them up. And so one of the ways we can best replicate that communication is by using some sort of messenger. And so we really like to use Slack for a couple of reasons that we'll jump into. When you create a Slack workspace, it's called a workspace, you have ownership over that workspace. So I can create one just for my Algebra 1 students, and I am the owner of that environment. And that's a little bit different than, let's say, sending a WhatsApp message that's connecting 2 phone numbers or 2 email addresses. I'm controlling the space in Slack. Students and families can download the app. So again, it gives that ease of a messenger for people that have their phones with them all the time and maybe aren't necessarily checking email all the time. It can also save time and energy for quick check-ins with students because I can either reach out to what's called a channel that we'll be looking at in just a moment. I can send all 30 of my students the same messages at once. I can send a small group of students a message all at once. I can send a private message to students. So there's a lot of flexibility for who I communicate with, how often I communicate with them. There are calling and video features as well in Slack. So if I'm messaging with a student and we want to hop on and take a quick phone call, maybe a parent wants to talk about something, there's that feature as well. So some of the features that we like to use with students, maybe you want to share links after class. You want to share the recording from a session that you just had. I like to post video messages because I can remind students about an assignment. They can see my face. I can tell them a joke. I can smile. You can create those channel communities. So maybe I have a homework help page. Maybe I have all of the groups that I have working together in live classes. Maybe group 1 has a Slack channel. Group 2 has a Slack channel. And I can also send private messages to students and private messages to their family. So we're gonna go ahead and take a look at what that Slack channel might look like if you create one for your class. So the Slack workspace that I'm sharing is actually our Mathspace teacher support workspace. So this is what it looks like when you open Slack. The nice thing is, you guys can tell I haven't checked Slack in like an hour or two. I get notifications at the top for anything that is part of one of my channels or a direct message that I haven't looked at yet. So I can go click threads and I can see who's been communicating with me while I've been away from the app. And it's just gonna have a feed here so that you can catch up if you haven't checked for a while. One of the ways I like to use this is by creating channels that help with certain things that we might have been doing in the classroom. So the homework help channel, I am asking students here, hey, if you need help with homework, if you want my help or someone else's help, you can post in this channel. So I can invite students to join the channel. I can give a description so they know the purpose of the channel and they can communicate with each other and I can come in and facilitate those communications. So if I look here, I see Casey stuck on a math problem. I love encouraging students, whether it's in Slack or not, to send screenshots because then I can quickly figure out, are they stuck on a particular step? Are they not knowing how to get started? Are they maybe just wanting help with the directions for the task? So I can go in here and click on the screenshot from Casey, and I can see what it is that she needs help with. When I want to reply to Casey, I can start what's called a thread. So in the thread is all of the conversation related to the original post. So I responded to Casey yesterday. I let her know that she started the problem off great, and I sent her a video link for factoring quadratics because I noticed that was the step that she was getting stuck on. I'm letting her know, hey, if you need any help after watching the video, let's take this conversation to a meeting where maybe we can talk more one-on-one and break down what it is she needs help with. And Casey says, thanks, miss. And then I look down and some students are posting work of their actual paper, the actual work that they're writing down. And the thing that I like to encourage here also is I walked away from this and my students are helping each other out. So students asking me, they're not sure what to do. Other students are hopping in to provide support at the same time. So students can also help each other out. And again, that's really helping with that community that might have happened in the classroom and now we're trying to replicate online. So it's very quick to create a channel. Let's say I want to create a channel for parents so that I can give parents information about when I'm holding online conferences or maybe support sessions for parents. So I can create a channel for parent support and I can give a description here, letting parents know what this is about. And as soon as I create the channel, I can immediately either add all of the people that are in my Slack workspace, or I can invite specific people. So if I only want to invite the parents and not the students, I can click through individual members of my workspace and I can invite them into this session, into this channel. And once they're in the channel, maybe I want to get their attention. Maybe I want them to know something's coming up today. I can use the feature @channel and it's going to send a notification to every person that's part of this channel to check the calendar for parent meetings. And maybe I want to get the attention of only the people who are online in this channel. I can add here and it's going to notify the people who are online. Maybe I want to ask them a quick question. I may want to send an individual mention. So maybe Daniel knows when our meeting time is. So I might bring it to Daniel's attention in the channel, but maybe it's information I want other parents to see as well. So there's a lot of different ways to communicate. Maybe I have a student that needs a little bit of extra support. I'm going to reach out to that student here and I'm going to have a private chat with them. So I can talk to them maybe about something they're struggling with or just check in and see how they're doing, and it's not going to the entire class or a big group of students. So a couple questions that arise when we use Slack. Can I ensure the conversations between students are appropriate? This is my #1 thing. Although we control the workspace, we can't control the private chats that students are having with each other. So it's a really great tool because I can see everything on every channel and I can see everything on maybe all of the group conversations that I created for students to have with each other, but there's still the element that they could be sending each other private messages. So we just want to remind students, you know, to use appropriate academic responses with each other, to be positive, supportive, encouraging, and really just that anything we do online never goes away. So that would be one thing you want to be mindful of when using with students. Why not just call, email, or text? I think a big concern, at least for me as a teacher, is I don't necessarily want every student and parent to have my personal phone number. I maybe want to set a little bit of a boundary there. So having Slack is still a phone app. It still comes directly to my phone. It can go directly to their phone or the computer. But it does keep that sense of privacy there. And the email inbox gets very flooded, whereas the Slack channels and individual chats are a bit more organized You can search them if you want to find information that has been shared already. You can search a channel for key terms in conversations that have happened in the past. So if you'd like to use Slack with your students, you can create your own workspace on slack.com. If you'd like to continue connecting with us, we also have a link to join the Mathspace Teacher Support Workspace. There's been a lot of great conversations popping up in the past few days, and we'd love to have more teachers continuing the conversation there. So we'll be sharing out that link a couple more times throughout this session if you'd like to join us. And now I'm going to pass it over to Mo.
Thanks, Gillian, for taking us through Zoom and Slack. I encourage everyone to join that Slack channel, and I'll remind everyone that we'll be on for an hour after, actively answering any questions that you might have. So hopefully we can keep the discussion going there and really support your ongoing as you move to digital learning. All right, we're kind of right on schedule. We've got 18 minutes left to talk about the final piece of the remote classroom, which is Mathspace. So at a high level, what makes Mathspace particularly good for remote learning is the StepSmart technology. So we'll go through that in a bit of detail in a second. And that's where the step-by-step marking that students receive and teachers can see, as well as the feedback, the hints and support that they get. If your students do have touchscreens, an iPad, a Chromebook touchscreen, then the handwriting recognition is also a nice touch, gives students the ability to handwrite as they would on paper. And then finally, the adaptive learning. So questions and topics are selected for students depending on how they're going. So this is particularly useful again in a remote classroom where you can't be on top of assigning every piece of work because you're not in the same physical space as students. So Mathspace can really take a load off you there with the adaptive learning side of things. Okay, so some of the features that are high level, we're not going to go through all of these in 18 minutes, but to give you a sense of everything that Mathspace can do, it's a complete digital textbook. So aligned to both the US curriculum for a lot of states, the Common Core in other states, as well as the Australian curriculum and all the various states in Australia. There are video tutorials that are already in there. So, you know, if you're moving to distance learning and suddenly you can't conduct the classroom sessions that you normally would, you don't have to reinvent the wheel and create all these videos yourself. You have a really big starting point with thousands and thousands of video worked examples that students are working through aligned to their curriculum. There's the adaptive learning element that I mentioned. There are project-based learning activities as well that you might want to, you know, use in a Zoom session now that you know all about how to use Zoom and breakout rooms and things like that. As well as the interactive widgets, you know, things where instead of having static content, they have sliders and they can see how graphs and diagrams change based on that. And finally, the gamification element. There's the ability for students to view their own progress is a really important piece of remote learning. When you're not around to give them as much feedback, how can students see how they're going themselves? So there's some of the features that we'll quickly touch on. We will be having deeper dives into Mathspace, but in the 15 minutes we have left, I'll pass on to Daniel to take you through some of these features.
Great, thanks Mo. So why Mathspace? Just a little bit of my background. Before I worked at Mathspace, I was working at a university and I was tapped on the shoulder and asked to teach a program online. And it was like 6 weeks and it was just it was like a summary course for like year 11, year 12 mathematics. And I thought, are you guys crazy? Like, how am I going to do this? And so actually I then came across Mathspace and then realized this was a really great tool to be able to use with students, even though I wasn't going to be in the classroom with them. So why Mathspace? So you can teach with Mathspace online. So it is a digital curriculum, as Mo mentioned. It's very easy to assign work to students, to track their progress, and even get them to be able to work independently. And that's the dream, isn't it? Okay, so teaching with Mathspace, it's a complete digital textbook. And so all the lessons and videos and worked examples you as a teacher are able to share with your students. You're able to search the textbook by curriculum standard. So that's the same for Common Core curriculum or also Australian curriculum if you're from Australia. And very easy to browse through the content. We can assign work to students, so it's very easy to create these tasks, and you can either create mastery-based tasks called adaptive tasks, or you can create a custom task, which is where you build it yourself and pick the questions you want your students to do. There are diagnostic tests that you can use. There are pre-made tasks like topic reviews. And there's also the ability to share the tasks that you create with other teachers at your school so you can collaborate with one another. You can monitor their engagement and track the progress of your students. So there are data dashboards. We're going to take a look at this in a moment, and I'm going to actually show you all of this live. And there's also the student side, which we'll demonstrate now as well. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me one moment. I'm going to click share screen. And so first of all, I'm going to show you the digital textbook. And so this is for Common Core grade 7. And so you'll see all the topics are listed to the left. And so I can go to a topic like geometry, for example. I'll choose the surface area of rectangular prisms. And so what I'm doing is I'm looking at a particular skill. So this is demonstrated to show students how to find the surface area of a rectangular prism. So I can scroll through the lesson. I can read the text. We also have lots of these widgets in Mathspace. So clicking the plus button, I can load this widget, and this is unfolding a prism. So being able to teach the students the difference between a 2D net and a 3D shape. And so we can toggle open, close, change the dimensions. So rather than just looking at a cube, I can look at a rectangular prism and see what that looks like. So we have lots of worked examples and as well in Mathspace where we can click watch video, and a video of a teacher will come up explaining to the student how to go through a question like this. If students don't want to watch the video, they can also just reveal the solution and read the steps, but the video is there for extra support. So as a teacher online, what I used to do with Mathspace is I used to share these lessons with my students. I would get them to review these lessons before they started tasks around this work. So you can do that in Mathspace by clicking share lesson. And so when you click share lesson, you can either do it via Mathspace. So that means when students log into Mathspace into their student accounts on their dashboard, they'll see the lesson there that they need to review. Alternatively, you can copy the link. So then you can paste that into your LMS, or if you're using a messenger tool like Slack, you can send the link to your students, or maybe in your Zoom live session, you post the link in the chat, and this will direct all the students to come to this lesson page. Moving on to the questions now, I can very easily create an exercise task for my students to complete. So when I look through this set of questions, if I see a question I like, I just have to click the plus button next to it, and this adds the question into my task. So I'm live creating a task for my students. I like to think of it like online shopping. Like, you might be on Amazon or something and you're buying things and, your objects go to the shopping cart. Well, that's what's happening here, except I'm buying questions and the shopping cart is my question task, my worksheet. So I'm not limited to individual skills. I can change. I can go now over to the area of a circle, for example, and I can start adding questions into this task from area of circles. So that way, rather than testing students on one skill, I can test them across multiple skills. I can even jump into another chapter or even another curriculum. I could even go to the grade 8 curriculum if I wish. I can jump into another lesson and I can start assigning tasks from here. Just my internet might have just dropped out a little. I'm asking it to do too much too quickly. So there's also the ability to search the textbook by standard. So looking at this curriculum standard from the Common Core curriculum, I can type it into this box and I can actually search the textbook by standard as well. So that way I could create a task based on curriculum standards or review the textbook from there. So this is how you create tasks in Mathspace to give to your students. I'm now going to pass back to Mo and he's going to demonstrate the student side of Mathspace. So what the students see and the support they can get when they're working on a question. So I'll stop my share and I'll pass over to you, Mo.
Okay. Okay, does everybody see my screen? Okay, thanks for nodding, Daniel and Gillian. So this is the student side of Mathspace. This is the student dashboard. You can see here any of those tasks that Daniel just created. They'll come up over here as my upcoming tasks. They'll also, any of the lessons that are shared will be over here. So if this lesson was shared with me, I can now open and view that lesson and engage with that. And one of the things that I want to focus on is the independent student learning. So even if you haven't assigned any tasks, this is going to be a big thing, so you don't have to constantly be on top of everything when you have so many students and you're not seeing them in the classroom. Students are always able to explore on their own. We'll give them recommendations inside Mathspace based on the work that they've already done. And then they can also view all topics and just explore on their own. So I'll just click on view all topics. And you'll see these progress bars here. So students will be able to see, okay, I've made some progress towards mastering fractions. They can go through in all the topics in their textbook and just work on it independently, as well as any assigned tasks. So let's have a look at solving two-step equations. They can go in there, and of course they have access to the lesson. Again, they can read that lesson independently, a scorecard where they can see all their previous questions, but we're going to focus on the practice side of things. So what does the student experience look like inside Mathspace? So solve equation 8 outside of m minus 4 equals 80. So the big thing with Mathspace that makes it different to other digital curricula is the ability for students to enter their answers as they would in their text into their workbooks. So over here, a student might say, okay, I'm going to divide both sides by 8. So m minus 4 is equal to 10. And when they submit that, you can see here a green check mark indicating that that's a correct step and they're ready to move on. Now, if a student was to make an error at this point, so if instead of adding 4 to both sides, they subtracted 4, you'll see, let's try that again. So the student gets that immediate feedback. Again, we're really trying to replicate while you can't be there as a teacher, having that support as they're going through. Now, if they don't know what to do as a next step, you'll see on the right-hand side over here, and this might be covered by the video, hopefully you can see it as I move my mouse over to the right, this hint option. So if they click hint over here, you can see subtracting 4 from m gives 10. What is m equal to? And it can show another hint, add 4 to both sides of the equation to get there. And so hopefully students can kind of pick it up from there. Now, I just want to show, what if a student did this another way? So what if a student decided to first distribute the 8? So then they entered 8m minus 32 is equal to 80. And you can see in this case, Mathspace again says that's fine. So we're checking regardless of which method a student uses to do their answer, Mathspace is able to kind of give them feedback based on that. And if they were stuck at this point and asked for a hint, then the hint will be relevant to the step that they're on. So really what Mathspace is trying to do here is trying to replicate, being the help that you can't be while not being in the classroom. So every student, as they're working through the questions that you've assigned or just independently working through, they'll get this help as they go along. If a student doesn't know what to do, they can also skip a step and that step will be shown to them. And that will come back to you on your dashboard when you're seeing how students are going. Now, based on how a student has gone, I've skipped some steps here. I continue. The next question that I get will depend on all my previous history of all the questions that I've done. And that's where the adaptivity comes in. And all of this will be visible to your side as a teacher. So I'll pass back to Daniel to take you back on the teacher side to have a look at what you see as a teacher. You're muted, I think, Daniel.
Now I am, thank you, unmuted. Thanks, Mo. I'll now share my screen and show you some of the teacher side, so how we can see some of that progress. So I'll just switch over to the task report first. So first of all, this is a task report of a task that I've set the students to complete. And so as I scroll through, I get this immediate report on, so I can either look by question. So for each of the questions that I've created in my task, how many of my students are getting it correct, how many are getting it partially correct or incorrect, and then how many of the questions are still yet to be completed. So this is a live report that updates. And so I can click anywhere to see which of the names of the students have worked on what. Or I can go over to the students, and so I can look at their progress by student name. So I have my student name. So then for each student, I can see how many questions they've got correct in the task, how many partially correct, have they got any more questions to work on? If the task's been completed, then it will be graded automatically. So we can see some of these students have done well with 99%, 89%, 93%. And so we've also got this progress bar. So Francesco, for example, has got 4 questions incorrect so far and is still working on that task. So this could be a point where I come in now and help the student. I'll also now jump over to the insights that you can get. So this is just that I can jump into my class in Mathspace and see how everyone is doing. So the student activity is a great way to see. So I can see that I've had some moderate activity from some of my students, some low activity from other students, and then there are a lot of students in this class group who have had no activity. So maybe this is because I've only been working with a small group of students, or maybe some of my students haven't arrived to class yet. Looking at the top questions to address, so as students start to answer questions in Mathspace, some of the questions that several students might start having trouble with, they'll appear in this list. So as a teacher, I can become aware of, oh, okay, in my class, some students are having a bit of trouble with the distributive property, for example. So then I can go start a Zoom live session, and then I can work with some students more on distributive property, as I can see that it's something that the class is struggling with. I'll now jump over to activity. And so this is really great for online teaching. We have something that's called live mode. So live mode is looking at the results of the last 90 minutes specifically, and it's not for an individual task, it's just for activity in Mathspace. So within the live mode, this data updates live every minute. It automatically refreshes. You don't have to click refresh. And so what's happening is all these students are graphed, and it's a graph of total numbers as total questions answered correctly versus the total amount of time they've spent in Mathspace over these last 90 minutes. So I can hover my mouse over some of my students, like Dr. Jack Feng, for example, who's had 31 questions answered correctly in about 30 minutes. So in that top left quadrant, your students are generally doing pretty good. They're answering lots of questions correctly, and they're doing it in a relatively short amount of time. Looking in the bottom left, if I look at Priscilla, for example, so that's 12 questions in 18 minutes. I'd say she's doing okay. Maybe going over to Weigen Lee, only 3 questions correct in 5 minutes. So not much answered correctly and not much time spent in Mathspace either. So that could be a good opportunity for me now to go over to Slack or my messaging tool and check on the student. So 1 minute just passed. So I just had some students shift around. So this student, Jonathan, has spent a bit more time in Mathspace and answered some more questions correctly. So what's great is I can see if my students are working. These are like my eyes and ears in the classroom. So I can look at the students who are active in the last 5 minutes, students who are active more than 5 minutes ago, and then these are the students who are active more than 10 minutes ago. So students who may be distracted at home, or maybe they are playing Minecraft like Jillian was talking about before, they're going to start to appear in this list. So that way, if you are running a live session with your students, or if you're talking to them on your messaging tool and you've set them an activity to do, you can actually use this to check on which students are working and which ones aren't. And then also this need assistance tab as well. So once a student gets several questions wrong in a row, they'll actually pop up in this list too, so that you can click and then you can see which of the students need your assistance. And so they might not necessarily be putting up their hand. They might not be asking for your help in Slack. And so once you see them pop up here though, they might be a bit shy to ask for your help. You can then go check in on them yourself. And so all of these lists you can click and you can see their names pop up below of who's active and who's not. So this is a really great way to check on your students live when you're working with them. And of course, you can look at their activity as well over a longer period of time, say over the last 2 weeks, for example. Now I can click on a student's name. So I'll click on Stuart's name, for example, and I can get a deeper dive into a particular student. And by doing this, I can look at their task results and their mastery levels. But what I can also do is I can check and see how much work that they're doing, how much of it is work that I have assigned them versus how much of it is self-directed. So self-directed work is what Mo was doing when the student jumps into the Mathspace and chooses their own task to do. That work will appear in these graphs as self-directed work. And any work that has been completed that was assigned by me in a task, that's assigned work. And I can also look at the time spent in Mathspace as well. So how many minutes is the student spending in school hours working on Mathspace and how many outside of school hours. So that's just a great way to check to see if the students are doing their homework. There's obviously lots and lots of features here in Mathspace, and I could spend a whole hour talking about it, but I just wanted to give you guys a really quick preview of what it is and how it works. We'll be running webinars over the next few weeks that you can jump into that will really set you up with how to use Mathspace. So I'll leave some of those details for another day, and of course you can ask questions in the Slack group as well. Okay, I'll pass back. Oh no, I have to answer some questions first. I'll do a quick FAQ.
Yeah, I'm conscious of the time, so we'll go through these quite quickly, and I think we'll pass any of the longer discussion over to the Slack channel. So
yeah, I can get through these pretty quickly. So can I use Mathspace for pre and post testing? Yes, you can create tasks and then use the same task to do a pre and post test. Are there pre-made tasks you can use? Yes, they're called task templates. Do you have diagnostics in Mathspace? Yes, we do have diagnostic tools that you can use. And so if you need help getting started, come to one of our webinars and we can provide you the training and support that you need. And so as Mo mentioned before, Mathspace is currently free for all of us that have our education currently disrupted. So if you come to this website, you'll be able to sign your school up for free access to Mathspace.
So as we wrap up this session, just a couple things to remember, because again, we're really giving a lot of information in a short amount of time, although it is what we're all seeking right now to start working with our students. But just remember, don't overdo it. Pick a couple tools to use with your students. Use what you're already comfortable with. Use the tools that are going to have the highest leverage for the situation that you have in terms of distance learning. Anytime that we can use student-centered activities, curriculum, lessons, it really does save us time and energy as we're transitioning to online learning. Training your students to use the technology is an investment. So just like we're learning the tools, then we have to go and train our students on how to use the tools. And it takes time, but there is some payoff if we're patient in the beginning with setting up norms and showing students where to access certain tools. And again, you're not alone. I haven't left my house now. I've already lost count, 5 days maybe. So reach out to colleagues, find people to collaborate with, see their faces, hear their voices, talk to the adults and teaching professionals that you respect and that you work with every day, because we can divide up some of this work together. Collaboration just makes it more enjoyable. And I think it's really going to help with everyone's morale right now.
Okay, so we're coming to the end. We've gone a little bit over time, and maybe some of you have to rush off to a Zoom class with your students now, or in Australia with 9 a.m. here. But what can I do right now? So check your emails in the 24 hours following this session. We'll send a recording out. We'll include our 7-step guide to running a remote math classroom. We have a webinar coming up in a couple of days, in 2 days' time, on addressing the needs of the whole child. Strongly recommend you come to that one if we have some highly experienced educators in a virtual classroom who are going to talk about one of the hardest things with online learning, and this is going to last for a long time, is just the isolation. So I think that's going to be a really informative webinar, so feel free to come along to that. This is a time where we're trying to we're feeling it. A lot of our team are teachers and really kind of distraught about what's happening. So we want to really share that around with everybody. So I encourage everybody to join the Slack community as well. Gillian mentioned it's we can get through this together. It makes it easier if we are kind of taking a friend along and collaborating. And at Mathspace, we want to really add value at this time. So that Slack community is free to join. Our team is on there and happy to help out with any ideas, not just how to use Mathspace, but how you might use Zoom, how you might use Slack, or any other tools that you're using. We've got a lot of good questions about, is Slack similar to Microsoft Teams and or Class Dojo or Remind? They are very similar, so they're the same kinds of ideas regardless of what tools you're using. That's what we want our teacher support group to be all about, so feel free to join there. I mentioned for the next hour, our team will be actively on that, answering your questions really quickly, so it'll be a great time to jump on that. And you can access our 7-step guide to teaching remotely. So thank you so much for joining today, and I hope that you've gotten a lot out of this, and I hope we can continue to support you as we all make this tough transition and deal with this outbreak. And I wish you all the best, wish all your students all the best, and anything we can do to help. We feel like we're doing just a really small little bit in providing access to Mathspace and hopefully helping you to adjust to this remote learning environment. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Again, with the webinars as well, if you want a deeper dive into Mathspace, register for our webinars. You can access them at webinar.mathspace.co, and we'll go through a 1-hour session where we go really deep dive into the features of Mathspace. See you, everyone. Thank you, Gillian and Daniel as well.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Catch you later.
Bye-bye.